Thanks so much for checking out the podcast. This is The Movies That Make You, where movies are more than just entertainment. They are a catalyst for meaningful conversations. My name is Jonathan Sprang, and I go by Sprang. And here on this podcast, me and my boys, we dive into movies that you need to watch in preparation for the new releases that are hitting theaters this week. But we don't stop there. We explore the morals, the deeper ideas, and life lessons that we can find throughout these films. Today is a special episode. We're doing a horror episode with my son and a special guest. Excited to hear from him in a little bit. And it is because there's a couple of horror films coming out this weekend. And All My Friends Are Dead. Both of those are set to come out this weekend. So we're doing Scream. Not necessarily a direct correlation, but horror and horror genre. So we're going to have some fun with that. We're going to break down the plot. We're going to talk about the impact that this movie has had on our lives and the fun that we had watching it this time. You can follow all of the movie making journey that we have and join the conversation over at Instagram at Movies That Make You. You can also check out all of our lists on Letterboxd at I Am Sprang. You can find the list of movies that make you laugh, the movies that make you cry, the movies that make you scream, and you can check out all the lists over there. Before we jump into the podcast, I do want to let you know about what's coming up on the Movies That Make You podcast. Next week, we got a special episode with the boys. They're going to be on the show. They're going to be talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. We're going to watch the 90s live action film, and then we're also going to watch the most recent animated film in preparation for the new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series that's coming out on streaming. The week after that, Kristen and I will be back for a parent episode as we talk about the Alien series in preparation for Alien Romulus. The following week after that, the original Crow movie with Jason Lee in preparation for the Bill Skarsgård version that's coming out that week. The next week, we have Fast and Furious series. The boys will be back in town. We'll be jumping into that, diving into all 10 films. They're having a blast watching those. So we're going to have some fun talking about those films, Dom and the family. So we hope that you'll join us for these upcoming weeks. We're going to have a lot of fun, and we hope that you're ready for the ride. So without further ado, let's get to the podcast. We are back for another episode of the Movies That Make You podcast. It's a special one today. If we were to give this one of the titles, it would be the movies that make you scream. And we are talking about Scream. It's like the quintessential movie for me. We'll get into that. I'm joined by my son, Jacob, who went with us. Introduce yourself.
I'm Jacob, and I'm 13.
Very nice. And we also have a special guest with us that's joined us for the first time, Mr. Josh Gossman. What's up, man?
Hey, what's going on, guys? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. So just kind of talking through how we met. Tell them a little bit about what you were in town for when we saw each other.
Yeah, so I just so happened our paths crossed. Was in Dallas attending Texas Frightmare Weekend, which they do every year. It's one of the biggest horror conventions. It's one of the biggest conventions in the U.S. But I was in town for that. And, the Scream screening was actually supposed to be on Thursday, a few days before that. I arrived at the theater, and then their flights got delayed, the actors that were there and stuff. So they moved it to Sunday. And then I almost went home because I live in Oklahoma City. So I almost left, and I was just going to, get a refund or whatever. And then I decided to go. It's funny because I had just left the convention, and I met Skeet Ulrich, and then at the convention, and then him and Matt were still hanging out there. And then I went over, and I had a ticket to the Thanksgiving screening with Eli Roth. That was right before that. And I didn't make it in time, so I got a refund for that one. And then I thought I'd just kill some time because I was by myself. And I went up to the bar at Alamo Draft House and grabbed a couple of drinks and was just kind of relaxing because we had a couple hours till the screening. And introduced myself to you guys, and we started talking. Yeah. And it was a really good chat. And I was like, oh, man, they both love movies just as much as I do. It's pretty cool. So,
yeah, man.
I don't get that as much. I lived in Colorado for 16 years before I moved here in 2018. And I worked at a video store for 7 years. I managed, there's a bug in my eye. I managed a video store for about 4 of those years and met some of people that I'm still really good friends with, some employees that I hired that are kind of like you guys. They know a ton about movies, and so I miss those old days because it was just so much fun, talking about movies all day at work and getting paid for it. So
For sure.
it's
For
fun.
sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah, we had a really good chat at the bar. So
Yeah, we were just kind of hanging out. Like we had gone actually the same as you. We'd gone to the Thursday night showing, and we're hanging out at the bar, and then we went into the theater about 30 minutes before the showtime, going like that's what Alamo Drafthouse does. They do like a customized, curated pre-show that's like 30 minutes of these clips from random stuff all over the internet that ties to the movie you're about to see. So I was excited. We were seeing a bunch of Wes Craven stuff. And then like I was looking around, there's nobody else in the theater, and I'm like, maybe
yeah,
we should check
yeah,
on this. And so they said that it was moved to Sunday. Very very glad that we got to come back and see it, and it was really cool to connect with you. You know, just kind of chatting and talking about movies and specifically talking about Scream. And I actually in our Q&A session, I got to ask a question. And before the question, I said. So Scream was my first rated R horror film I saw in the theater, and I'm bringing my son, and it's going to be his first rated R horror film to see in the theater,
yeah,
and so it was just kind of a cool moment. And I didn't even think about that until like the week of us
yeah,
going, and I
yeah.
was like, this is cool. I mean, Jacob, tell us a little bit about like what's your fascination with like scary movies and horror movies? Why do you like them so much?
I mean, I feel like it's just like something I can hang on to, and like the feeling of that thrill and like excitement to like what's gonna happen next and what's like, yeah, it's just fun to be at, and it's a cool vibe like in the room whenever you're like around scary people.
We've watched some scary movies at the house. You know, we did the Ring series. You know,
Oh
even though
yeah,
the other ones aren't great, the first one's great. And yeah,
right,
it's
right.
fine. But we watched those in Colton like that, and then we actually went and saw Boogeyman at an Alamo Draft House, and that came out earlier or last year, late last year. So trying to introduce some of those PG-13 movies, but I thought, you know, looking at what Scream has in it, and I thought this is one think Jacob's okay to see.
That's a
It's
great first movie to go to. I mean, I wasn't it. That was my first time seeing it in the actual theater because I was born in 1988 and it came out in 94, so I was 6 years old when it came out in theaters. I don't think I actually saw it until I was trying to think about it after we were talking that night. I think I want to say I was maybe like 12, so
hmm
probably like going into the 2000s is when I saw it. I probably rented it at Blockbuster because I'd heard about it and stuff, and then I finally
yeah,
watched it. Yeah,
yeah. It was some friends and I we went and it was at the Dollar Theater, so it was the
yeah,
first time being in the theaters, but it was
yeah.
like the tail end of that time. And then like so. Kind of jumping into that kind of horror, I asked Jacob the horror question. Like, what is it about Josh for you? Like, when did your fascination with horror films start?
So it's actually funny talking about Wes Craven because Wes Craven was the first director that I saw any horror movie when I was a kid. So my dad, I think it was my dad, and like we had family in town and stuff. We rented a Nightmare on Elm Street, which is just such a groundbreaking film. Robert Englund, it kind of launched his career. I've met him a couple times, and he's super awesome in person. Just like all that movie came out, like that was my first introduction to like a true horror movie, and it's terrifying. I mean, as a kid, that movie scared me real bad. I was like, because it's so realistic. That's what Wes Craven. I think I fell in love with him because I didn't watch his like extreme movies until later on, like Last House on the Left or Hills Have Eyes, even the remake. Like they're really great horror movies, but they're very very deep and like kind of hard to watch. So Nightmare on Elm Street, though, I mean that movie was pretty messed up. So that kind of introduced me, and then I fell in love with. I'm a diehard John Carpenter fan. So Halloween 1978 is like, I mean, it broke so many grounds for what we have today. And I met
Yeah.
John Carpenter last year at Frightmare actually, and it was just surreal to like be in the presence of him. And he just has so many great movies. But Halloween '78 is just so like it was low budget. He invented
hmm
these shots that we've never seen, like nobody had ever seen before in the '70s, and it's just like it's just such a cool movie. So Halloween, I'd say like Halloween, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and then Jaws actually.
Yeah.
Jaws, just because of what that movie took, and it launched Steven Spielberg basically, but like all the issues they had making that movie and how he was able to make you scared even though you don't see the shark until like an hour into the movie. Um,
So what's crazy
that,
about that film, what's crazy about Jaws is I don't think people always really associate it with like being a scary movie or a horror movie. It's horrific because it's, sharks after you. But in all actuality, it is probably, it ends up being, if you look at it just bare bones, it is basically Halloween in the water
yeah,
because
yeah,
you're in a boat instead of a house
yeah,
and you're being chased by this unknown thing. And then, of course, like you said, the beauty of that was the suspense of not seeing the shark
yeah,
really well until towards the end of the movie. But it really is. It's a scary house film. It's a haunted house
yeah.
film, but it's on a boat in the
In
water,
the
and instead
water,
of
yeah.
yeah.
The
So
water
it's
is
just crazy.
basically the house, yeah. So, but yeah, I'd
Yeah,
say that was like my early introduction, and then I just took off from there. I mean, when I was working at the video store, especially, it was just
yeah,
we'd get like the B title horror movies, we'd get the really good ones, we'd get the classics. So we got to rent movies for free from work. So
yeah.
I have a massive movie collect. That was my first. I You see the Funkos and stuff. I started that more recent, but my very first thing I ever collected was Blu-rays, box sets, DVD. I
Hmm.
have mass collection just from working at the video store. So, um,
Yeah, that's
Hellraiser is
awesome.
another one that I watched early on that I just like the effects.
Yeah,
I'd say 80s horror was just so groundbreaking, just not only for just a horror genre, but like the practical effects, and it's like true movie making. So I think that's what got me. Some of the
yeah,
acting's not the best in the 80s movies, but like they're so good because you read about them and you're like, that's how they made it. Like this is
yeah.
all real. It's so
So
crazy.
I had never, so for me, kind of the horror thing started, I think honestly, my fascination hit at Scream, but I think, the prior to that, it was always like, it was the taboo genre of film, right? Like as a kid growing up, my mom didn't really want me to watch scary movies. So it kind of had this kind of mysterious piece behind it. So it was always a thing I wanted to watch, but wasn't allowed to. So that kind of had this mystique about it. But I do remember one time she had like some friends over and they were going to have they were adults, but they were going to have like a sleepover, like a bunch of adult ladies kind of just coming over to hang out. And I was just stuck in my room. But they watched, Halloween, and they had gotten Halloween too, but I don't think they made it. And they were just kind of having fun and laughing at it because it's like, it was that kind of,
Yeah,
they weren't taking it too seriously. And so they weren't getting too scared and they were just kind of
yeah,
talking stuff to it to try and make it not as scary. But I think for me, like it really was Scream that kind of kicked off this fascination, and that actually gets to the question I asked the guys, at the screening was like the thing that Scream did incredibly well, and it's kind of the first of its kind where it went super meta, and it was basically commenting on its genre and calling out its own genre for all of the things and all the rules that Jamie Kennedy's character does. Andy tells all the rules of horror that you don't even think about when you watch them in the 80s and in the early 90s, but then Scream calls it all out. And
yeah,
then it's like this, so then seeing that happen in the film fascinated me to the point where it's like in college, because that was like, middle of high school when Scream came out. So when college came around and I was kind of on my own, I was hitting up the video store every October and I would like watch whatever, like it was Nightmare on Elm Street was first, and then I did the Jasons, and I did
yeah.
the Halloweens. So since Scream, I've really kind of dove in headfirst to horror films, and I love the genre. I think there's some really unique things, some really cool things. We just recorded an episode for The Quiet Place, which is
Oh,
another horror
great,
film.
great film.
So we posted that that would have landed the week before this one does. But yeah, I mean, it's a fun genre. And I think for me, Scream was the kickoff kind of what you were mentioning, Michael Myers of Halloween being that initial kind of slasher film. It was like the first of its kind to have this kind of mysterious guy coming after babysitters That was the first. And then like it got replicated and replicated and replicated and diminished and diminished and diminished. And then you've got Friday the 13th comes out and it's like, oh wow, this is crazy. And there's a I'm not going to give it away because Jacob hasn't seen it, but there's a twist at the end of the first Friday the 13th that's
Oh
really
yeah.
revolutionary and nobody saw coming. And then you get to Freddy, who's this personality out like everywhere. Like Halloween, Michael Myers and Jason are very like they don't talk. There's no personality. And then you got Freddy that comes in, and he's all personality. He's nothing but personality. And on top of that, he's scary, and he can come after you in your dreams, which is also another fascinating thing that film did. So later this year, in October, we're going to do like 4 weeks of horror theme, and one of them is going to be those characters. So I
Nice.
think I might invite you to come back
Yeah,
if you're
man.
up for it.
Anytime.
And we can definitely talk those like maybe top 5 or top 10 of those kind of iconic characters. The one thing I did want to mention, and I think we can jump into Scream, but Hellraiser, I had not seen until last October. Kristen and I watched it, and it was always one of those that was like, for me, it was like I felt like maybe that's the scare, like this scary on another level, and I wasn't necessarily, it didn't really grab me because I don't know if it didn't have the pop sensibility or whatever, but we watched it, and the exact same thing that you said was what Kristen said walking away, was like, wow, the special effects, the visual effects, the practical effects that they did to create this movie, it's scary, but like just how did they do that? You know, how did they make those things happen in film? And so you're right. It's fascinating to see some of those originals.
Yeah,
for that reason.
I would say that's probably why I fell in love with Hellraiser, because like the sequels are fine. There's some fun ones in there, but like the very first one, just what they did with that film. It's not necessarily like what you said, not the like poppy scares or the jump scares and stuff. It's kind of like a mind. It messes with your mind, and then you look at these visuals Clive Barker created, and it's just like, man, you got a twisted mind, but it works, because I mean that movie is just so. And then Doug Bradley, I met Doug Bradley. I haven't met Clive Barker yet, but I met Doug Bradley in Colorado. He came to a con a while back, and super nice guy. He's British, so it's kind of weird when you like meet him. He's like super kind of like low talking, and he's not Pinhead, obviously. He just had nothing but great. Him and Clive have a really good relationship, but
That's awesome.
And then to go back on the link between Halloween and Scream, Wes and John were both like, I wouldn't say they were best friends, but I read a lot of articles about both of them from the past, and it seems like they were pretty darn close. 1994 was when New Nightmare came out, and Wes hadn't returned to the director's chair for Freddy since the first one. And then In the Mouth of Madness, John Carpenter's movie, which is really good if you guys haven't seen it, they came out the same time. And then 2 years later, we got Scream, and the writer, I forget his name, I think it's Kevin Williamson.
Yep.
Yeah. He was a huge fan of Halloween '78, so that's why that's how he wrote part of the script for Scream. Was he was like kind of thinking the same stuff as Halloween, and then he put kind of changed it up a little bit, and then obviously made even the costume, like the Ghostface costume, is almost the same way that they found the Michael Myers costume. They just went to a store, they went to a Halloween store, found this old, I don't even know what it was called, and they were like, well, that's the costume right there. So it's kind of cool how they like not share a universe, but they link. And then also in the beginning of the Drew Barrymore scene, at the beginning, Mr. Becker, when they come home, he says, call the Mackenzies, which is what Jamie Lee Curtis says in Halloween '78 to the kids when they run out. And then obviously Billy and his dad, their last name's Loomis, so Dr. Loomis. So there's a lot of similarities and links. It's pretty cool, but
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So Jacob, we kind of talked about some of our horror films, and you said, you kind of have the horror film, like you like to watch horror films. So up to this point, besides Scream, what would you say is like your favorite horror film that you've seen?
I think I would have to say, I think, what was that one? The one with the grandma?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah, we did an episode on The Visit and The
I,
Sixth
I listened
Sense.
to it. Yeah, it was
Yeah.
great. It was a great episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What's great
it's
about
funny because you guys were talking about he did, how he did After Earth before The Visit. I read somewhere that all the money he made from, which wasn't very much, from After Earth, he used that money directly to make The Visit. So
Wow.
I think it was like 4 million or 6 million or whatever. That's what he
yeah,
made off that movie. He just put it back in to make The Visit, low budget, made a bunch of money, and it's genius. It's pretty
and
cool.
there's interesting, yeah, and in his they've got The Watchers that came out this past weekend. So he's producing that one. And then he's got Trap coming out later with Josh Hartnett
That
later
looks
this
good.
month. So it looks intense. It's like your dad takes your daughter to a Taylor Swift concert or something. It's kind of what it feels like. And then like you find out it's a trap for like some serial killer. They
Yeah,
just showed it in the trailer. I was like, that's
the trailer
interesting.
looks pretty trippy. I'm hoping it's pretty good. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, cool. Well, let's kind of jump into Scream. I know you said you took some notes. Do you want to just kind of walk us through kind of the premise of the film and then we can kind of talk about maybe our favorite parts?
yeah, so basically it's the movie kind of feeds off of it's totally a 90s flick. So I mean the whole home invasion stuff, like horror didn't start making the home invasion films kind of until, more recently, like hardcore, making them. But this one was totally what that is, but without cell phones. So it's, totally home phones and, high school kids, kind of not necessarily stoner high school kids, but like just
Right.
normal high school in a
Yeah.
small town. Drew Barrymore in the opening sequence, she's Casey Becker, and she's. It's been years now, so I'm not. I hope I'm not spoiling it for a lot of people, but she dies in the opening scene, which was pretty groundbreaking and very, very brave of them to do because she was the top. I think she was originally
Yep.
supposed to play Sidney Prescott, who Nev Campbell played, but she turned it down because she told the writers, "I think I don't want to get typecast into this, same kind of characters and stuff." And it was a genius move because you're especially back then your whole point in a horror movie in the very beginning, like the first 10 minutes at least, is you want to grab their attention and make sure that they know what they're in for. And to have a huge star, she wasn't as big then as she is now, but have Drew Barrymore, I mean, top billed person, and
Mhm.
everybody goes and they're like, oh, Drew Barrymore, and then she dies in the first opening scene. That kind of like,
Yeah.
you knew what you were kind of in for. So basically, Casey Becker dies, and then they're some of the kids in the area. The news is covering it real heavily. There's a group of kids that they kind of focus on in the movie. Nev Campbell's character, Sydney, her mother was murdered a
I
few
think about a
years
year
before.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, like before Casey Becker. So and then they kind of feel you get set up like everything's kind of linked, but you don't know who. Obviously,
Hmm.
not enough of the movie's gone on, and then you're introduced to the boyfriend Skeet Ulrich, and you're kind of weary of him. He's the bad boy, the good looking, probably looks like he drives a motorcycle or whatever. So like that old high school cliche of like the 80s or whatever. But yeah, so you don't really know for sure, but you kind of they set you up to think he might be the killer or he might not, whatever. And then his friend Matt Lillard's character, Stu, they're kind of grouped in together in a lot of the scenes. And then you have Jamie Kennedy, who's actually, in my honest opinion, he kind of like steals the movie for the.
Yeah.
That's why he's so popular at conventions and stuff because his character is just so fun and important to the movie, and the fact that he works at a video store that's kind of like Blockbuster is
Yeah.
like so cool. And his references are just on point. He reminds me a lot of like I wasn't quite that like extreme, but when I was hardcore and working at the video store, going to movies all the time, telling all the customers and everything about what movies to watch. That's exactly how I felt talking to them. As I was like, telling them facts about movies or telling them this is what
Hmm.
happened. So I related a lot to that character. But anyway, they revolve around this group of high school students, and you're just the whole time you're trying to find who the kill
Yeah.
who done it kind of, but not that's not the main focus of the film. You're just kind of on edge the whole time. And then they throw in, you know, Ghostface now has become such an icon. But at the time, I think, you know, we hadn't seen that kind of like slasher killer. I mean, Jason, you know, wears a mask and Michael wears a mask, but I don't like this killer runs and you can't really get away very easily. You don't know who it is. They call you on the phone and they just kind of follow you everywhere. So it's it keeps you on the edge of your seat. There's Wes Craven. It's kind of cool because he, you know, not necessarily that he hadn't done anything, but he hadn't really done a movie like this since the original Nightmare on Elm Street. So it was like to kind of, because there's 10 years, I believe, in between. I think he did Nightmare in 1984 and then 94. So 12 years. It's a long time in between. He did other horror movies, but nothing like focused on a slasher killer or anything like that. So but yeah, it's just kind of, you know, David Arquette is really great in it. He's the local deputy Dewey. And Courtney Cox, you know, she was big on Friends when that came out, so people were kind of thrown off because she kind of had to, you know, be a mean person in this movie, and so the whole casting was all kind of, it threw people off because, you know, you got Drew Barrymore dying in the first scene, you got Courtney Cox who's on this #1 television show and she's like super nice on the show, and she's kind of a mean reporter, and you got David Arquette wasn't anybody yet at the time. He's kind of added some silliness to it, and it's just perfect. Looking back on it now, it's perfect. I mean, I don't think you can cast anybody else in those roles. Just a great film. I mean, I'm a huge Wes Craven fan, but it's just a great movie. Great premise.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So I think kind of you mentioned the phone calls. That ends up being a theme that's continued in this movie. It's the Ghostface is going to call you before he kills you, and he's going to have a conversation with you. You know, and that first scene with Drew Barrymore is just really, really crazy. What did you think about that first scene, Jacob, with when she's on the phone with him asking him questions and it's all jovial, like, but then it takes a turn. Like, what were your thoughts when you were watching?
It's just, it turned very quick. Like, I knew about like the phone call stuff, and I knew that like it was a bad guy, but he just turned so quick from like being so like, what's your name? And then he went to like, I'm inside your house. Like, it's creepy.
I want to know who I'm looking at. Like, what? Oh, I want to know who I'm talking to. Like, it's just like the subtle like throw in there, and the then she turns and she realizes, no, this isn't a random caller. This is someone who I need to be scared of. And then, of course, the boyfriend and all that stuff. And he plays football. He's going to kick your butt. Like, it's just like so good. You know, and the popcorn popping scene that she's playing with the kitchen knives. It's just they're all like little subtle things, but it all just amps up the tension in that first scene. And one thing I did want to mention too is I love the mom's scream, because I don't think we really get a huge scream the rest of the movie necessarily, but that opening scene, she sees her daughter hanging from the tree, guts hanging out and everything. Yeah. And then she's the one that has that Jamie Lee Curtis belting scream that kind of sets the movie on. And she just, I remember watching it this time, and it was just so crazy.
Yeah, how cool, Jacob, that's your first. I mean, we don't. Yeah. I always tell people, I'm like, you can't go watch a movie that you love for the first time again. So it's like, what a cool movie to be like, oh, this is my first time seeing it. Because I mean, that opening scene, I tell people all the time, not just horror movies, like it's maybe one of the greatest opening sequences in a movie, I mean, of all time. It's so good. It's iconic. It's I mean, it sets it apart from anything else. It's so good.
Yeah. The other thing, so Jacob's favorite, tell him about your favorite character and what made him stand out so much.
It was the guy that Matt Lillard played.
Stu.
Oh, Stu. Yeah.
I loved him. He was so cool.
Matt Lillard was perfect. Perfect.
Stands out about it that made you like him so much.
I just liked how like he was so playful while being like in secret, like he was, you know, the bad guy. But I loved how he would just like make jokes and like subtle things. Like I heard that her pancreas was in the mailbox. Like,
Oh, that scene was like, I just had that thought, like, in the video store, I mean, I could probably quote the whole thing, but Jamie Katie's going off. He's like, if they watch prom night, they'd say time. There's a formula to it, a very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect. And it's just like, and Stewie's telling like, calm down, you know. But the part that stood out to me when you just said that was like when he says, now that Billy's been arrested, do you think I have a chance with Cindy? And he just laughs at him. And then he's like, no, I don't, not at all. Like,
Yeah.
it's just the delivery, the beauty, like his delivery of every single one of those lines is so perfect. And of course, watching it this time, having Jacob be so fascinated with that character, like I see it, like I'll be back, ooh, you know, like all that stuff. And then like, we got a problem here. Like just every single delivery is just spot on. Matt Lillard is just insanely good.
And I was going to say I consider myself a 90s baby. So like I grew up watching he was huge in the 90s. I mean, not just Scream was kind of like what catapulted him, but he did like She's All That. And he was a kooky character in that one. He did a bunch of movies with Freddie Prinze Jr. Not only Scooby-Doo, but like him and Freddie are like good friends.
Mm-hmm.
But he always played in the 90s. He always played SLC Punk. He always was playing these like kind of super animated characters, which is so, I mean, he fits it perfect. And I think, I don't know if I read this or if it was at the Q&A, but he was talking, somebody asked him about being cast in Scream, and he apparently wasn't even there. I don't think he was even there to audition for it. He was in the hallway with somebody, and one of the casting people they thought he would be perfect. And so they said, hey, why don't you go read for this? And he ended up, getting the job, obviously. And it was, I mean, I love hearing stories like that from actors because you look back years later and you're like, there's no way that just by chance you're like in this room and you're the perfect cast for this movie. Like, it's insane.
So I did want to mention too what comes to mind. I mean, of course, Randy, Jamie Kitty character, he knows movies, and he's the one telling everybody the rules. He pauses the movie, so you don't know the rules. You can't have sex, you can't drink or do drugs. Like these are you never say you'll be right back. Like those are the three. That's the horror film. And when you think about it, like movies that are recent, something like Final Girls, where it's like they're actually doing the same thing, but a lot more focused. And they're showing like, hey, these are the rules of the 80s movies. And in order to survive, you have to, it's the final girl that survives, and she has this like superpower and like to take them down. It's a really, really cool movie too. But another person that watching this time, I realized, and I didn't pick up on it before, is Billy Loomis, like Skeet Ulrich, his character in this film. He's quoting movies more than even Randy is. He says the line about Andy Perkins, we all go a little mad sometimes. He's saying, it's kind of like in, Pet Sematary, or it's kind of like in this. And he's in, like, I thought I'd sneak up in your room because it's kind of like that movie. I was watching this movie that made me think of you. It's just like he's fascinated with films too. And I think I'm with you. Like, that's kind of where I grew up in that. I fell in love in films when I was in high school. And so I've continued, and I'm trying to instill that in the kids. That's why we had the podcast. I mean, we watch movies at least 2 or 3 a weekend. And it's just that fun thing to kind of share with your friends. And I think with him, we should have known better. Like, he knows all these movies so well. Yeah. Of course, he's figured out a way to get around the system. And of course, he's figured out a way to be the villain and survive. Like, it's just watching it this time was really, really fun. What was your kind of take on Skeet early on?
Yeah, I mean, because like I was saying earlier, back then, especially like mid 90s to like early 2000s was all about mostly comedies, like the high school comedies and all that stuff. So he was playing it almost like your initial introduction to him, sneaking into Nev's room, all that. It's totally exactly what you would think with somebody that looks like that. You're like, oh, and the way he like talks to Nev, and he's just like, he's Mr. Cool, like he thinks he's the hot shot or whatever, and he just, I don't know. I think a lot of people that I've talked to about Scream, like I always ask them if I remember, I always ask them like, hey, did you figure it out like pretty early on, or did you, like just from little subtle things? And they were like, yeah. Some of them said, yeah, for sure, and then others were like, yeah, we thought this, but we thought it might be somebody else because something happened. But I think that was what was so genius, was like Wes knew exactly what he was doing. I think, like what you were just talking about a second ago, I think throwing all those things in, quoting classic horror films and stuff, I think this movie was basic because Wes didn't even actually, he turned the movie down originally. I think Kevin Williamson talked to him. Well, they think Sam Raimi was originally supposed to direct, and
Oh, interesting.
so was another one who I was kind of like, oh, George Romero, which was a
Oh,
weird.
wow.
I mean, not I love both those directors, but like
Sure.
I can't. If a movie like Scream, I just don't think you can go out because I mean, like they didn't make serial killer slasher movies or anything. They made some incredible horror movies, but I think it'd be totally different. Sam Raimi probably could have done the comedic portion because he's good at like balancing the horror and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think this movie was just an ode to horror, like Wes and Kevin. And they just wanted
Yeah.
to throw all these, and they just by chance found the perfect cast, so like people could deliver those lines the way that
Yeah.
they be delivered, which is really cool. So
what did you, Jacob? Had you figured out who it was that was the killer?
No, I didn't. Well, I was like suspicious of him, but then like how suspicious he was, it made me want to like think of something else because like
Right.
he kept on getting blamed, like he was blamed for the earlier killings, and then he got out because there wasn't really any evidence for it.
yeah,
But it's just
I think for me, like I didn't figure. I mean, everybody. I think I was following the script. Like the script was trying to tell me he's your killer, and then the script says he's in jail and someone still makes the call, so he's not the killer. Like
yeah,
that's what the script was trying to lead us down. And I just went like I remember the first time I watched it, I just went down that whole like it just had me hook, line, and sinker because it did such a masterful job of setting him up to be the bad guy, and then giving an immediate like, well, of
yeah,
course he's not because he was in jail. And
right,
I think even in the film, I think the other thing to this too is like, I don't know that I've ever seen any other movie up until that point that there were two killers, right? It's Jason, Michael, Freddy. They operate alone. They do everything alone. There's one killer in all these serial killer movies. It's one. There's just one.
yeah,
So to think that like, just even that alone, that there were two working together. So like in the opening scene, hey, I'll let you off the hook if you can tell me which door I'm at. Well, if there's two of them, it doesn't matter.
yeah,
She's dead either way, right? I mean, even
right,
just that simple little subtlety that like watching it and kind of looking back at it and realizing, wow, they just had it. The premise was just so good. And of course, he's getting really upset at Sydney in that scene when she says, well, who did you call when you had one phone call when you're in jail? Who'd you call? Man, it would have been great if you called me. It's like, how can I convince you I'm not a killer? And then of course,
right.
Ghostface comes in and kills him. You're like, well, of course he's not the killer now. And then, oh, this is
Yeah,
masterful. Like, so good.
I mean, Wes has done some really great movies, and I know he wasn't the main like screenplay writer on it, but him and Williamson together, like,
Yeah.
just I mean, that's what you want out of a horror movie because a lot of them they don't give you that opportunity to even think. It's automatically like, well, this is
Formula.
obviously
Yeah.
who it is. This is what's going to happen, and this is how it's going to go. So that's why I love when there is a random movie that either the ending or somewhere in the middle or even the beginning of the movie, like there's something that leads you to multiple things, not just
hmm
stick on one thing. So they did a good job with Scream.
So the one thing I wanted to mention too about Kevin Williamson is that he cut his teeth in Dawson's Creek. So in the 90s, he's the
Oh
man.
yeah,
He's a
yeah,
screenwriting man, right? Like
yeah,
and so I think Scream was his first horror film that he did. And with that success, it launched his horror film like writing. And because I think he wrote, I Know What You Did Last Summer. I think there's
yeah,
like two or
yeah,
three other like franchises, not just movies, but franchises. This guy leaped from Scream and then created and just built all these people's careers. Jennifer Love Hewitt, the girl that Freddie
yeah.
Prinze Jr.'s wife, Sarah Michelle Gellar, like
Yeah.
all these guys. I mean, she was in I Know What You Did Last Summer, and then she was in Scream 2, which I think Scream 2 is masterful. I love that one
Good.
too. But yeah, she's in both of those movies. I mean, it's just wild.
Yeah, no, I think you see that nowadays a lot. There's like they start people really creative writers and good writers for the most part if they give them a chance. Like if Hollywood's like, okay, we're gonna make a bet on you. Like they start out in TV and they do. Most of them are like HBO Max shows or
Yeah.
uh, Prime. Prime gets a lot of good writers too that nobody's ever heard of and sometimes they spin off and do movies or horror movie or whatever it is. So it's kind of
Yeah.
cool that was how he turned out. So
So Jacob, favorite moment. Do you have a favorite moment from the movie that you can nail
Whenever
down?
Skeet and Stu, whenever they both were in the room and they were cornering, I forgot the girl's name.
Sydney.
When they were cornering Sydney, it was
great
just like,
scene.
oh, they're both the killer. Like, that clicking in your head, like, dude, that's how all this happened. Like, that's how they were able to get away with it up until this point.
Yeah, that scene. I mean, when you just started talking about, it, I started having the visions of them stabbing like each other, like
Yeah.
and movies don't make movies make psychopaths more creative or something like that. It's like, and he's just stabbing. I'm dying here, man. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just, man, so amazing. So,
I
what about
even
you, Josh? What's your favorite?
in the movie. I mean, it's hard. I obviously the opening sequence is so great, but I also really like. I'm kind of with Jacob. The ending is just so. Just I think not only for all the lines they deliver, but like just you see how actually demented both these guys are. Like this whole time, you kind of they've been acting kind of weird and stuff, but they're just like stabbing each other as many times as they can, and they're
Yeah,
and like Matt Lillard can't even breathe. He's like spitting up blood. Like they're just crazy.
yeah.
They just keep going, and you're like, wow, this is. I mean, not only the twist, but also just how well acted between all three, Nev, Matt, and Ski is just so. It's an iconic scene as well.
So the thing that jumps out to mind when you're saying it, if I'm going to land in that scene as well, and I think for me, like the moments in that scene that are pivotal are it's a callback um, to the conversation in the video store. Like, what's my motive? When he asked Randy, what would be my motive? If I was the killer, what would be my motive? And Randy says, it's the millennium. Motives are incidental. Oh, good word, right? Well, then in the scene, he's like, oh, I think she wants a motive. And it's kind of like a callback to like, I don't have one. And Stu's like, oh, sorry, we don't have one. And then he goes into his motive and the camera goes to Stu. And it's the first time he's heard about this. You're like, you led me on a revenge scheme and didn't even let your partner
Yeah.
in on your motivation. Like that's when it kind of like that's when you start to go, okay, this is going to be trouble in paradise because he thought this was just a fun party gag, and now there's actually stakes involved. And man, and then of course the later Nev Campbell calls back to that same thing, going like, well, Billy's got his motive. What's yours? Peer pressure. Just so great.
Oh,
So
I
great.
do. I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I do really enjoy just because of how it was shot. I like the scene where I forget the character's name, but Courtney Cox's like
Yeah.
assistant, and he's out in the van, and he keeps going, he keeps looking, and then
Yes.
he forgot there's a delay, so he's like looking, and then he doesn't see anyone, and then Ghostface is like right there in his face, and then the whole sequence of him like sliding onto the windshield, and Courtney Cox wrecking the car. Of course, she would wreck the car, but like that whole sequence is pretty.
Yeah.
It keeps you on the edge, and it's kind of like a energetic part in the movie. And it's crazy, like that last scene it's well, you can't really, it's all kind of combed into one, but it's like I think I read it's like an hour long, the final
Wow.
house party scene. So
Wow.
it's like that's also a ballsy thing that they did where they're like, you know what, we're gonna stick in this same sequence for a whole hour, which is like almost half the movie, well, more than half the movie. But it's a
Yeah.
it's a
And
good.
there's so many great beats and there's so many great moments in that, even though it is that one party scene, you've
Yeah.
got, planting the camera, you've got Tatum needing to go get beers. She dies. You got, I mean,
Another
all of
great.
these great things. Like it's just,
Yeah.
the other one that jumps out to me in that same thing is when Ghostface is like wandering around the house about to kill Randy, and Randy's looking at Halloween on the TV and saying,
Yeah.
behind you,
Yeah.
look. I mean, that's such a great like tongue in cheek moment for the audience. But yeah, man, I'll say it again too. I just love when Billy gets the gun, lets Randy in the house, and says, "If the whole place has gone mad, we all go a little mad sometimes."
Right.
You're just like,
Yeah.
oh, that's the moment. You go, oh, crap! Like he's the guy, and then of course he's quoting Psycho. It's just
Yeah.
so amazing, so amazing. Well, cool.
Eric,
Any other? So, any other final thoughts on the movie, Jacob? What's your take? Like overall, like what do you rate it? 5 stars? How do you do
Yeah,
it?
5 stars.
5 stars?
It just makes me excited for more movies or like more horror movies they're not gonna be like that same story and that same like feel. It's gonna be like that type of horror where
That
it's like,
tension.
yeah, it just makes me excited to see more.
I'm excited to share the rest of the series with you because I think. What are your thoughts on the rest of the series? And now I can share mine, Josh. I know we talked a little bit about it, but you said you hadn't
Yeah,
really dove into it as much.
so I still it not because I don't want to see it, but I still haven't seen the most recent one in New York. I'll get to it. I just haven't got to it yet. But the rest of the series, I think they're great. I mean, three has its moments where you're kind of like, oh, this is not as great, but it's got a couple of really awesome scenes as well, plus an all right twist at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Two is a lot of fun. I mean, it's gun jumps from a high school to a college campus, which is a little bit more,
Yeah.
yeah, more room to work with. I think the fourth one, the cast in it, I don't know how you can't not like the fourth one because,
Yeah.
and it was Wes's last movie he directed before. I mean, he passed 4 years after that came out, but that was the last movie he directed. Scream 4, I'll always like that one as well. And then the more recent one, I think it was cool. It's kind of interesting how they, the original like trilogy, I guess 1 through 3 is more 90s, early 2000s, and you can tell like just the vibes and the costumes and the cell phone and technology stuff like that. And then you jump forward to like this newer one with like Jack Quaid and stuff, and
Yeah.
it's all modernized. So it's Jenna Ortega, and it's all these hot young stars that younger audiences are into, and digital phones and all that. So it's kind of cool how they're sticking with the same
Streaming.
formula, but it's a new reiteration, I guess. So it's like it's kind
Yeah.
of cool. But yeah, I like the franchise as all. I even like the TV series. I don't know if you guys ever saw
Yeah.
that, but I thought it was, for being an MTV show, I thought it was pretty good. So
Yeah, I would agree with you, man. I think for me, I love to, I'm with you. 3 kind of was a little bit of a dip, but I kind of chalk it up to like they were trying to tell this kind of trilogy story, and this is the rules of the trilogy, and I thought that was cool. But the other thing that I think that makes all the sequels that much better and give you opportunity is that they all are commenting on themselves too. Like
yeah,
Scream kind of takes this genre on blast and like kind of redoes and commentates on the horror genre. And then Scream 2, they're showing up to a Stab movie, which is the retelling of the Gail Weathers book based off the first story of the Scream movie. Like it's just like
yeah,
so they're like commenting on themselves, and then you get to, well, this is the trilogy, so this is how trilogy rules work, and then you get to the fourth one and like all the Stab movies, yeah, this is how they all work, and it's like they all know they exist in a world where these were things that happened, and then they were retold in movie form. So I mean, it's just mind blowing,
yeah,
and I think the technology changes. It makes it more difficult for horror films to be realistic because you're like,
yeah.
well, I would just use my cell phone and blah blah blah. But
Right,
so they have to get more creative with how they, put these characters in those situations and what can they do and not do to where it makes sense, plausible sense for a modern audience to like say, well, yeah, that's how that would
right.
have gone down. But I did want to mention that like it's so crazy to me, and I'm not going to give away which one, but one of the movies, the opening like 3-4 minutes is a retelling of like 4, 5, 6 Stab movies. Like it's all these
Yeah,
false starts. You think it's the movie, but it's actually the Stab
yeah.
movie, and it's just crazy, crazy, crazy.
Yeah, they did a great job, I think, just organizing them. I mean, and they're all kind of spaced out too. I mean, it's not like they all, how a lot of horror movies nowadays, they'll come out every year with like a sequel or every 2 years, whatever. Like they were kind
Yeah,
of spaced out. Scream 1 through 3 came out fairly close to each other, but these other ones, they're kind of, it took a while for them to do 4, and then after 4 they just did them 2 modern ones. But I mean, it'd been a pretty good break in between, so it gives the
yeah,
audience a little go watch other stuff and come back and like have a new love and appreciation for the old stuff, which I think is the whole point of why they do it in the first place. So
For sure. Hey man, final thoughts on Scream. What's your take? What should our audiences be doing with Scream?
I mean, just enjoy it. I mean, if it's your first time watching it, I'd say you're very lucky. I mean, the first time watching the original Scream is just such a like surreal moment in movie history and pop culture history because it's, it has everything that they reference in a lot of stuff today, not just horror movies, like just how they tell stories and stuff. So it's really cool. Um, and then me personally, the Scream franchise means a lot to me. Halloween still, just because of the original. I not necessarily all the
Yeah.
sequels. I do like some of the sequels, just for what the original Halloween did for me and got me into horror. I'm always more partial to Michael Myers, but I do appreciate the heck out of the Scream franchise because it just keeps giving, and they're still doing stuff, and giving it to a new audience, and then we get to share it like you and your son. And I have a 4-year-old, and he's autistic, but he loves horror already. We don't show him any of the crazy stuff, but he, like at the Halloween store, he loves the masks that talk and stuff because he thinks it's funny. So he'll probably get into horror when he gets older. So I can't wait to share that. I take him to the conventions with me, and he's met John Carpenter and all these people. He has no idea until he gets older that how cool it is. But it's
That's
just
awesome.
something that I want to share with my kid, and I know you feel the same way. So it's kind of a
Absolutely,
special.
man. Very cool, man. Well, I appreciate you joining us today, man. And like I said, we're gonna have you back because I definitely want to bring you back in October for us to talk about some more of the scary movies. That'd be a lot of fun. Before we jump off, though, what do you have going on? Because I know you've got a YouTube channel. I want you to get an opportunity. Just tell us what you're doing and where people can find you.
So my username on most platforms is POPpaGoss, POPpaGoss, and I have a YouTube channel where I do many different things. I talk about new steel books that I buy, Blu-rays. I collect Funko Pops. I collect autographs. I collect horror memorabilia. I go on toy hunts. I do all kinds of stuff. And you can go over to that channel. And then I also have, I do a lot of stuff on Instagram. I'm involved in a few communities, horror communities and Funko communities on there. And then that's pretty much all I do right now. And then I'm hoping to start a movie podcast myself probably pretty soon. So just keep posted on all that, and I'll post that when I get to it. But I do appreciate you guys having me on.
For sure, man. And I'll definitely put all your information in our Instagram posts and also the podcast notes so everybody can find you. Again, man, this is such a pleasure.
Oh, happy Father's Day too.
Hey, you too, brother. You too.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
All right, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, for sure. Catch you guys later.
Catch you later. Thanks so much for listening to the Movies That Make You podcast, where movies are a catalyst for meaningful conversations. We hope that you'll give us a like, a share. Let us know you were here over at our Instagram at Movies That Make You. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. So until next time, keep watching movies.